Hi, this is Todd Fitzgerald, and I'm the author of CISO Compass and also executive in residence for the Cybersecurity Collaborative. We're pleased to bring this virtual briefing today with some leadership profiles of two great individuals. And this has really come about as a request from our members. The Cybersecurity Collaborative works with CISOs across all industries, across all verticals, to share information and to have professional development and share strategic insights and provide the tools for people to be able to enhance their security programs. And one of the requests that we get from the members is how can we get better as CISOs? What sort of mentorship type capabilities do we have? And this webinar or virtual briefing is really different in a lot that you'll see, because a lot of the webinars are about content and about how we go about doing certain technologies and implement them as CISOs. But what we're doing here is really diving into the personal journeys of some very prominent CISOs and share those experiences. And by sharing those experiences, that helps us all develop, and we can all learn from these journeys and things to watch out for and what to do. I joined the Cybersecurity Collaborative because it shares information and shares across this information for CISOs and helps us all get better. We're trying to protect the citizens, the companies from the cybercrime that we have today. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce our panelists today. First, we have Dave Eslick. Dave has a very astounding career. He has more than 25 years of experience. He has joined Chipotle in 2019 as the global CISO. Prior to that, he was the CISO for Starbucks and has worked across all facets of information security. And he was also with PetSmart before that. So some excellent experience. So welcome, Dave.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, great to have you here. And then we also have Marc Varner, who has had an excellent career, started out in consulting with Deloitte and Navigant Consulting, has had some great opportunities, which we're going to hear about. He was also the global CISO previously for 7 years with McDonald's Corporation. And today he's with Yum Brands, stays in the food sector. And Kentucky Fried Chicken, Pizza Hut, Taco Bell are some of the Yum Brands companies. So welcome, Marc.
Thanks, John. Glad to be here.
Glad to have you both here. So let's get started. So Dave, tell us, what made you get into cybersecurity?
Yeah, so interesting story. I started my career in software development, so I was coding. And from there, I ended up also getting infrastructure responsibility, system administration, network administration. And I was working for a startup, this was early 2000s, and I was trying to kind of figure out where I wanted my career to go. Outsourcing was really big. Besides having a degree in computer science, I also have a second Bachelor of Science degree in business finance. So when I was looking at the economics of outsourcing at the time, I was like, I don't know if I'm going to be able to live out my career in software development and maybe even in hosting and infrastructure. I was reading a book at the time called Good to Great by Jim Collins. And in that book, definition that he provides for business is if you can't be number one or number two in a particular area, you should exit it. So I kind of turned that back on myself, on my career, and I'm like, okay, so I've worked with a lot of really smart people in my career, and of all those people that I respected, what did they come to me for? What did they seek my advice or my counsel for? And the answer came back, security. So yeah, I was lucky early in my career. I wrote crypto for Boeing, and so I'm like, I actually should probably narrow my career and focus in on this. I enjoy it. And so that started my career in cybersecurity.
Very interesting, very interesting. And to take the, what was going on at that time with outsourcing and, figure out that, that there was a niche, that you could follow that really had your passion. It must have been very eye-opening for you.
Yeah, I mean, I think I actually took a step back in my career. So I was a director at the time. I made a move to my first dedicated security role. It was more around IT risk, was with Amazon. And so I stepped back to a manager position, which on paper, that's a bit of a risk, that it looks like you're in a progression and then all of a sudden you take a step back. And, it was a little bit of a challenge getting people to see me through a different lens, right? All my experience had been in software development. I did have infrastructure experience, which I think kind of helped bridge at the time into cybersecurity. But then from there, that was really the springboard for my career. The next position after Amazon was as the CISO for PetSmart. So a little bit of a risk, but well worth it. And I think, that background in application development has served me well, especially today.
Sure. Absolutely. And I think sometimes taking that step back in your career, or what seems like a step back, is actually giving us those tools that we needed to learn, right?
Yep.
To be able to move forward. So Marc, good to have you here. And so what made you get started in cybersecurity?
Largely, it was my parole officer said it was that or jail. Okay, choice. Not really. Yeah, I thought so. It's turned out well, like Dave. So I think it's interesting, like, especially now, if we look at the up and coming people, the first observation is like, our job didn't even exist. Like, there's nobody in our age group that started in cybersecurity, went to school, there was a thing, they had this track, because largely it didn't even exist, which is always interesting to me to think that I've spent as many years and had a great career in something that, was not even around when people were thinking about going to school. And which is why I think traditionally everybody came from, computer science backgrounds. That's really where I had gotten my start, is working in infrastructure. And then got to a point where I had sort of run that gamut. I was, somewhat bored with it. And then I went into operating system support. So in the bad old days of NetWare and OS2 and dare I say Lotus Notes, and doing, some of that type of stuff, and then doing a little desktop development. And then I was fortunate enough at the time, I worked in a really large company, Arthur Andersen. And at Andersen, you had the ability to move around, and it was one of the great benefits. And it just so happened that I had a really good friend that had gone over to our firm-wide information security group, which largely nobody even knew what that was and that it had existed. And he was very technical, and he went over there and worked with the firewalls and things like that. And he and I were just having a conversation, and he called me one day and said, "Wow, this is really cool. You should look into this and talk to our director. We have an opening." And I did. We had one conversation about the role and the job and things like that. They offered me the gig, and I went over and started working in our what we called at the time the risk management group. And largely that was we call it the softer side of security, where we did a lot of the policies, investigations and risk assessments and awareness and those types of things. And it felt, it fit like a glove. It was something that I was comfortable with, and I was fortunate enough at that point that, there was a passion that I could turn into a career. And I always tell people and joke that, I'm glad they pay me what they do, but I'd do it for half the price. Just because it's, I feel like I'm a fortunate person because I really like what I do. And there's so few people, it seems like, that, can say that, sometimes about their career. So yeah, that's the sort of how I just fell into security.
I just got a note from Yum. I think they're indicating they just found some cost savings. And I'm assuming that this parole stuff and Arthur Andersen aren't related at all, are they?
Yeah, no, it wasn't my fault. It wasn't my fault they went under either. That wasn't my doing.
Okay, that's good. And you had some really good experience with that, though, didn't you? You were you had some international experience as well that you was that at Arthur Andersen that you had that experience?
It was, and oddly, it was only 6 months after taking the position, which, I look back at that and I think, wow, they were crazy for sending a 30-year-old, kid that didn't know anything, over. But yeah, shortly after that, they had a habit of putting, people on secondment if they thought it was a high potential situation where the growth would help. And they did just that. So 6 months after really kind of getting into the group, I was offered a position to be able to go international and went to live in the UK for some time and set up the organization for all of EMEA. So for them, EMEA was India, Middle East, Africa, and most of Europe. And that was very near 9/11 and things like that as well. So the experience and just going through that and understanding sort of the dynamics of all of that have been something, for the rest of my career have always served me well. Certainly when I went to McDonald's and some of these other companies like Yum that were international, the opportunity that gave me and the insight that it gave me was, just something I could never put a value on.
Did you find, just working with international cultures, was that very different? Was that really expanding your horizons at that point? What do you take that learning back today into, just differences even within the United States in understanding different cultures?
Yeah, every day. It's funny. It's a funny dynamic where I guess it has two very divergent roads. You learn how people can be different in how they accept, just their norms and things like that. Shockingly, the other side is that you also learn the other side of that, which is people are people. As humans, we all have some of the same, culturally we can be different, but as humans, we have some of those basic needs, right? We all want to be important. We all want to, there's just these things that are common that you can use and you can tie across. Respect is not a cultural thing. It crosses all cultures. And if you can be respectful to someone, we all want that as a human need. And then there are certain cultural things that, we learned, and that those lessons have stuck to me, today. If you're instructing in Asia or trying to get a point across in Asia is different than it is, somewhere else. And it's not right, wrong, or different. It's just the way that things are perceived and the way that, their culture works. And so I think, I've been far more effective in the rest of my career in international assignments based upon what I learned, in those, first few months.
Absolutely. So Dave, have you had those kind of cultural experiences as well?
Yeah, it was one of the main drivers for taking the position at Starbucks. So I had the chance to build out a global team at Starbucks, and that's a great example of be careful what you wish for. So unlike Marc, I hadn't had a strong foundation or background in international relations. So I kind of had to learn on the job I'm having to build a team. So not only are you trying to influence leadership, right, on the importance of cybersecurity, but you're also trying to source talent and build that team and integrate with a team. And largely the team that I had at corporate headquarters in Seattle also didn't have a lot of international experience. So brand new discipline, brand new topic that you're bringing internationally to business units, and you're building it out while you're trying to do that and learn the nuances of international. So great learning. I think, you know, in hindsight, I probably would have looked to augment my team with somebody that had some experience doing that, as opposed to we were all kind of doing it for the first time. I could have used some help there, but tons of learning, valuable experience. I'm much better for it, and my current organization will reap the benefits as we build out internationally.
Excellent. So Dave, as you look back on your career, what was it that set you up for success? Is it education, mentoring, curiosity? What was the driver there?
Well, so here's what I would say. If I had to boil it down to one thing, it would be continuous learning. So I've stated before in public forums that your education isn't as important as your passion for what you do, and constantly learning and keeping up and keeping pace. We all know that our jobs are going to change, and as Marc had said, most of us that hold the seat right now didn't start our careers in cybersecurity. It wasn't even a profession. It wasn't a discipline. And maybe you got some flavor of that through infrastructure, right? If you were in networking, you dealt with firewalls, and that was kind of the genesis of how things grew up. But none of us started our career in this. We've been on a journey, and the people that are inquisitive, self-learners, self-education, I can use that all day, every day. So if you're going to do that, because we know that the job that we have today, 5 years from now, is going to look very different. So we're all having to do that, and our teams are having to do that. So I think that is the big defining rod for me on who will be successful in cybersecurity, who will not. It is a very dynamic space. You can't know it all. At the same time, if you are too narrowly focused, you probably won't be valuable for very long.
What are some of those things that you're, like looking at now that 5 years ago weren't even on your radar?
MLAI. So when you're talking about machine learning, the algorithms that are used and the insights that business is looking to glean from that, what happens when you get incorrect direction from that? And that's all based on the data sets, right? So machine learning is an algorithm, but you have to pump a lot of training data through it to be able to get those insights. What happens when the business makes a decision on that later they figure out is flawed? Who are they going to look to say, how did that happen? And what do we need to do about it? in every other discipline in technology, if there is a consistency or integrity problem, they start with security. And we are not tooled today to be able to do that from a knowledge and expertise standpoint. So that's something that, you know, as I'm looking at it, you know, where are those tools and techniques coming from? And what do I have to be thinking about today as in my hiring practices to make sure that I have the talent that will be needed, you know, 3 to 5 years out?
Absolutely. Marc, what sort of things did you see in your career that set you up for success?
So I think either, you know, not so coincidentally, it's amazing the similarity in answer that I would give there, is that I think in order, and you had education and mentorship and curiosity, I think you mentioned. I think, you know, by far and away, you know, in order, curiosity would be the number one, but I capture it differently. I say it's more about having a comfort level with living in a constant learning curve. And I think that that's, you know, sort of echoing exactly what Dave said, is that this is an area that, you know, for good, better or worse, it's, you know, probably the greatest fun part of our job. And it's also the most irritating, is that there are no 2 days that are alike, and it changes at such a pace. I make the joke, I have a brother that's a structural engineer. And my running joke with him, because we're brothers and we pick on each other in our professions, and he makes fun of me because anything that ever breaks on his computer is his security team's fault. And so I bear the brunt of that. And, you know, my line to him is like, really in engineering, you know, calculus, when Newton invented it, was about the last new thing, right? So things don't change very much in math. It's a very constant thing. So I think, how tough can the job be? You know, it's a joke, but it's not really a joke. In our world, if you don't have exactly what Dave is talking about, like if it's not a healthy level of just constantly being okay with that curve changing and the dynamic being different, and you having to keep up on top of that, you're probably going to hate this job, because, you know, that's just one of the natures of the beast that comes along with it. If you're one of those people that thrives on that and it keeps you excited and engaged, it'll be the most interesting career, you know, you could possibly, you know, imagine. And so I think for me, that has to be the number one thing, and just being comfortable with that, because there's a lot of folks that aren't. And then mentorship would probably be my second, is that, you know, you need to find those people that, you know, you can learn from. And that sort of ties into the third, which I think is just having people that are successful in this, to me, have super high degrees of observation. And observation can work on a couple different paths. You can observe good things, you can observe bad things. And the better you observe and the more that you can absorb and adjust and sort of navigate yourself based upon what you have seen, all of that experiential, you know, sort of knowledge makes you so much stronger. And a lot of times it makes you stronger and better without having had to pay the price of learning it sort of the hard way, which we all have those lessons as well. And they tend to stick with us very, very, very well. But I think also along that way, as you see certain things that work and don't, and the better you can then apply those broadly, it certainly gives you a great advantage in being able to sort of navigate what is otherwise a very shifting and changing career path.
Yeah, and I think those are great insights about how this industry has changed. I recall when I wrote the first professional Cso leadership book, I started that back in 2006 when the Cso was, you know, there was like a handful of people there. And then when I wrote this last book a year ago, the I thought, well, I'll just go in and I'll make a few tweaks and I'll bring the content forward. And it ended up being a complete rewrite and was twice the size of the first book. All because the issues that we're dealing with are just so different that, as you guys have articulated, from 15 years ago. And there is this career, and I'm almost envious of people coming up into this field, that there's actually a really cool career path to become a CISO. And I think you've articulated that so well, that you have to learn about so many different things. And so what is it that pushes you to what motivates you, this excellence? Were you born this way? Did you acquire this desire, this passion, or where does that come from? Dave wants to answer first, I can tell.
Sure. Sure. Well, I do think, I joke a lot that there is a protector gene in all of us. There is this kind of I will say core ethos for right and wrong, and the individuals that have been successful on my teams and those that I've watched in other organizations just inherently have that. And so there's no, it's not coincidence that there are a lot of individuals that were former law enforcement or former military that kind of move into cybersecurity, because they kind of have that built within their DNA. I think though the part for us as security leaders right now, as Marc talked about, we are building a discipline. This is something that by and large for individuals that are relatively close in age that are leading those disciplines, they didn't start their career and look across the aisle or up or down a few floors within a building and say, geez, I really want to join that team. It just didn't exist. And so we're paving the way, and there's a responsibility that comes with that. I think all of us are trying to the best of our abilities, not only to execute to the mission that we've been assigned, but also to cement the value within the executive teams on what this discipline can contribute to the organization. It should not be just viewed as a cost center. Oh yeah, well, we have to do it because regulation is telling us this. It can be a competitive advantage for the organization in operational efficiencies, and to kind of bring that forward. So I think those are the things when you're looking at it, doesn't come along every day, right? That individuals get that opportunity. Maybe today, the next big discipline will be data science. And maybe they're feeling the same kind of historical pull to say, we want to be able to establish this long-term as a critical part of corporate DNA. But I mean, for me, that's what motivates me and the teams that I lead, that say this is a very unique moment in time, and let's maximize it.
I really like that, building cybersecurity into the organization as part of the DNA, and not just, it's just something that we have to do. It's really critical to the business. Marc, what thoughts do you have?
I think I hate Dave going first because he says what I was going to say. Beyond that, though,
Great minds think alike.
Yeah, of course. If you think that way, then probably poor ones do as well. We just have to figure out which side of that we're on. So I think Dave kind of said what, kidding aside, what I was going to say is I think, we all have those personality tests that, our HR departments make us take, and pick yours, Insights, Myers-Briggs, whatever. I think when we do those things, you will find, at least it's been my experience, that security people, generally speaking, will mark off the charts on, personality traits surrounding duty and accountability and protection mechanism, and they have high degrees of an insight for justice. And so I think if you take sort of that and you mold that together, whether they come from law enforcement or they just have that, within them, I think I want to be excellent at what I do, and I want our team to be excellent at what we do, because we owe that largely to the people that are trusting us with it. And I know that probably can come across as hokey or whatever the case is, but in my world, practically speaking, we possess 1.2 billion with a B customer records, and no, that's not the schematics to the space shuttle or the next Boeing jet fighter. But if you're John Smith and it's your personal information that you've entrusted to somebody so that you can be in a loyalty program or whatever the case is, it's important to you. And, we've all been there where we've had something happen to our identity, and there's nothing more irritating and, disruptive than having to redo all of your stuff. And it's hard, and it really takes people, I genuinely think about the time that it would take one of our customers to have to go through redoing all of their personal information and cards and all that other stuff. That's time that they don't have. There's other things that they would rather be doing than that. And largely that would be our fault, because, we didn't really hold the line on what it was, what our promise to them was. So I think from, that regard, it's just that sense of accountability, toward that. And then if you expand that, we also have that to our shareholders, because there's a, gajillion people that have put their money and invested it in our company. And if something catastrophic were to happen, they would lose that value, and that's unfair to them. And then even from our leadership or our board members, if I think of it as that audience begins to get smaller, these are people that I know, that I talk to, that I meet in front of. And it's almost as if they've given me the keys to their house and said, here, take care of this while I'm gone. And it's a really expensive, nice house. That puts a certain responsibility on me, where I do feel sort of, duty bound, to take that really seriously. And for us and our team, there's, we don't want to do anything mediocre. If you're being, handed something with that much trust, I think you have a certain responsibility to take it very, very seriously and want to be, absolutely the best that you could possibly be. And the other reality, guys, is that they, whoever they are, the bad guys, the ones that we're trying to prevent every day, they want to be really good at what they do too. They have that same sort of sense. So if you don't have that sense of excellence, it's going to be a long day, because the people that you're trying to protect yourself against certainly have that level of mindset.
So I wonder if people outside of, the security community have that same view, because I see that as well, that there are just so many great people inside of the security community that are willing to share with each other, willing to collaborate, willing to, do whatever it takes to help somebody else out to do that protection, to that thing that you call duty. And so, is another question around this, that a lot of times we're standing up for what's right versus what's wrong. And even though that's not an easy thing to do. So any ideas on how we do that, Marc?
Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking when you said that, because it does. I spend a lot of time, I think a lot of time, sort of rallying people. And when I say people, I mean our stakeholders, around the fact that that's why we do what we do. Because for security people, you can get a pretty bad rap because that's what you seem like is, oh, you're a clanging cymbal and you just want to, be doomsday and all of those other things. I think it's important for people to realize once they understand your heart and what your passion is and why you're doing it, they become a whole lot more of your advocate than, thinking that you are that impediment that's just there trying to, do or, make their project go slower or whatever the case is. So, for me, I think number one has always been for me to make sure that the people that I work for understand that this is a part of my job, and that healthy level of conflict, as I like to call it, that I'm going to bring to an organization. I'm going to be seen as a disruptor. And if that's not what you want me to do, then, that's okay. I'll go somewhere else and do it. But, we are going to be disruptive in that way. And then I've successfully sort of navigated that in the organizations that I've been at by tying that to something that they probably do know. Because security, honestly, to a lot of that leadership is new. So what I draw the comparison to is, think of us as legal or audit, which are, two, forms of, traditionally they're not always the most liked parts of an organization, but they're very, very necessary. For us, the tie that I always make is food safety, because for obvious reasons, that is a governance group that has a really, really big hammer where we are. And, but it's really, really important because if you have food safety problems, it's really hard, in the restaurant world. So that's a very, I try to draw comparisons so they understand a little more about our group and where we come from. And the other thing is I think you need to work hard in the off times to be seen and known for being reasonable and balanced. And I have found that then on those few times when you really need to lean in and just, frankly, be a jerk, that you've had enough in your political bank account that will take you through. Because then when you go to leadership and you go to folks like that, and you just don't have time to explain something, or you say, this is the way it needs to be, generally speaking, you get a lot more agreement at the really critical times that you absolutely need it. If you've invested with your stakeholders before that, to be able to be, known as reasonable and someone who can, who can reach a compromise and understands the business aspect of what you're doing as well.
Yeah, I guess to add to that, so now I know what it feels like to follow, because Marc said essentially what I probably would have led with.
You're welcome.
Yeah, to kind of augment that a little bit, I think there are two things that I've done to help build that political capital, because you will burn through that at certain times within your career, is to get people to understand, to get the other business leaders to understand that you're coming at the problems from a different angle. So where most of the time the customers are internal, right? When they're, especially in IT, when you're talking about technology hurdles for implementing a new loyalty program, let's say, right? The business is all excited about loyalty and what that could mean, and the additional revenue and how great this is. And IT is trying to serve that, right, by bringing technology to bear to enable that new idea. Security is coming in and saying, well, that's great. You're talking about all of these new customers that we could add. It's accretive, but what about the base that we've built? And are we alienating some of those? Or are we putting that data at risk? So where most of the customers are internal for the other business units and ideas, our customers are external. It is the board of directors, right, for our shareholders and our customers. And where's their voice in this decision to say, I got it, this is gonna, this has the potential to add revenue and increase on the bottom line, but there are risks associated with that as well. And when people understand the role that you're playing and why you're bringing that forward, it's like, who else is bringing that forward to have a balanced conversation? And the last part that I would leave, and this is great advice that I got from a CIO that I reported to in the past on leadership. He said, if you're not putting your job on the line once or twice a year, you're not pushing hard enough. We are all leaders in the organization, and we are to move this enterprise forward. So recognize that's part of the job. So once you become comfortable with that and say, yep, I know that a few times this year, I'm going to make a statement, take a stand, do something that I then step back and go, well, this is a seminal moment. I may be here tomorrow. I may be someplace else. I think, especially in security, that you need to be comfortable with that, and you need to figure out how to build those muscles. So if you're not a CISO and you're within department as an individual contributor or middle management, I would say exercise that and start to make sure that you get comfortable with it in preparation for elevation within the organization.
Well, and wouldn't you say, Dave, too, that if you don't take those kind of risks and you play it safe, that eventually, you know, when it comes time to cut budgets or whatever, they're going to say, what were they doing again for us? What was the value that they were adding? So
yeah, well, I mean, my joke is that I have yet to receive an email, a phone call, or a comment from anyone within an enterprise that says, hey, thanks a lot for we weren't breached today. Well, I'm really proud of the job you're doing. So the problem with the position, and I think Marc alluded to this a little bit, is most of the time when there's visibility, it's negative visibility.
Right.
And you got to figure out how you can balance that a little bit to say, here are all the good things that we're doing, or this is what it looks like, and how do you get airtime, right? How do you get room for that, for people to say, oh yeah, I understand. It's constant and persistent. It never goes away. And just because I'm not coming into your office doesn't mean we're not working extremely hard. It's the visual of the duck, right? Above the water looks nice and calm and just floating, but below is paddling like crazy.
Paddling like
and so that's kind of how the security team can be viewed.
So did you find during the pandemic, did you find any shift in that you know, were they coming to security and saying, hey, we really need your help now, versus the no breaches happened today? How did that play out? Marc, do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I think it accentuated really something that, you know, we do every single day, but maybe the business doesn't appreciate, you know, to Dave's point, like that we're the counterbalance. We're sort of that inner voice and the conscience to the organization in many instances, and they get that, but it's not like out there. It's not prevalent, right? It's like buying car insurance. Everybody has to, you know, do that. And so you're like, okay, it's an acceptable thing. I think this particular event brought about an oh crap moment at a leadership level and across a number of leaders that it rarely does. And that was oh crap, everybody's going to be remote right away. What does that look like? And how do we do that? And what are the concerns? And then all those questions instantly bubbled up. So I think the speed and the momentum and the force with which that happened, and how many people, like we have, I call it, you know, sort of Dalmatian awareness, where they get inspired in spots. We have certain leadership that'll go like, oh, hey, we never thought of that, right? So that's terrific. I think the difference here is like right away, your HR person, your finance person, your, you know, all of your legal person, all of a sudden at the same time went, wow, this is really going to be different. Well, what if? And they started asking, you know, they're generating the questions that we normally generate and answer for them, and then just tell them we already answered it. They were the one generating those questions. And I think that that made the difference in this particular, you know, world where they just wanted and needed those answers right away. And being prepared to be able to answer those, you know, made everybody feel so much better so quickly. Well, hopefully, or it raised some really big issues that you hadn't addressed yet.
Sure. Yeah, very, very, very different times where, you know, people are coming to us and asking for that support. So what sort of people have inspired you? I'll start with you, Marc, in your career.
It's people that would be, I think you'd find very unusual, because it's normally, like for me, I draw a lot of inspiration just from, so I'll draw from, you know, first of all, the restaurant industry, you know, that I've been in. I draw a lot of inspiration from our crew members, to be honest with you, team members, whatever we call them. Because and I grew up working in restaurants. So if you're in this gig, you know, you always go and you have your restaurant time and it's forcible. Like you've got to go in there to learn what their life is like. I grew up working in a restaurant. I was in Georgia. It was 9,000 degrees in the kitchen, because it was only 800 degrees outside. And, you know, it's hard and it's stressful. And, you know, in many times, you know, we're putting, you know, our consumers in a restaurant in the hands of a 21-year-old that has incredible responsibility. And if you think your job is hard and you multitask and you want to whine about it, go work a drive-through where you're doing 13 things at the exact same time and you're in crisis mode. Somebody slipped, something's not working, Billy just called in and he's not coming in. I mean, I just kind of look at things like that where if you look at the complexity of the people that we're kind of serving, you know, a big part of my job is to make those people's lives easier. And obviously that's so that we can serve our customers better and all of those things. But, you know, for me, it's drawing inspiration from, you know, those people who are really working incredibly hard, you know, and they're not drawing the big salaries and all of those other things, and they don't get recognized like we do in corporate and things like that. You know, there's no corporate recognition program for them sometimes. So to me, I just draw, you know, a lot of, you know, sort of inspiration from wanting to be able to help them as best we can.
Well, and to stay on that thread, because I just made the move less than a year ago to Chipotle. This is the third brick and mortar retailer that I've worked for. PetSmart, then Starbucks, and now here. And in all of those organizations, when you're hired into a leadership position, you have to spend a week onboarding in the stores and performing all of the duties. And to Marc's point, I grew up working in retail, in food service as well, through high school and college. Every time it kicks my butt. That job is so hard, and to do it with a good attitude and being inviting is unbelievable to me. And so much so that when I came back from my week immersion for Chipotle, I told my wife, if this isn't my last CISO gig, this is my last job in retail, because I can't do that again. I am getting too old to try to keep up with what is required of that role.
It's good to have that appreciation of what everybody goes through, you know, our customers and our employees on a daily basis. Both of you have given a lot back to the security community. how important is that to you? And you know, why do you do that?
You want to go, Marc?
Yeah, I mean, I can say it,
I
you
don't
know,
want
pretty.
you two fighting over it. But don't fight over
Yeah,
these specifics.
I can say it pretty succinctly, I think, which is just for me, and this has always been, and you guys, I've known, you know, both of you for a long time, and certainly Dave, this is a passion of ours. It's just, we of all the, if you look at all the verticals and the things like that, we were terrible at this. You know, I have seen it grow, you know, so much, but we were awful. And if you looked at the most basic sense of how viruses used to be made, it was by our adversaries being a lot better at this than we were. They would do a thing and then somebody would build on it and they'd collaborate and they'd come up with this new thing. And then it would make us all go crazy for 3 days. And then somebody would do that and it was like lather, rinse, repeat. And we were awful because we didn't talk to each other. And we all had the same problems, but, you know, we let whatever, our legal groups and a whole bunch of other people go, oh my gosh, you can't, you know, you can't say that that's a problem. Well, Dave knows exactly what I go through every day because he goes through that. And, you know, all the other people in those verticals do. And so how stupid are we if we're not taking that, you know, and just coming together and being able to be better at what we are. And at the end of the day, better serving those who we're trying to protect. I mean, yeah, we have our own companies and we have our you know, stockholders and things like that, but it's just, you know, to steal the line, you know, from Dr. King, we're a lot, you know, more alike than we are different. And so it, you know, it just seems to make sense. And like I said, it was always a frustration for me that we didn't do it very well. And it was for bad reasons. And I'm so happy that we, you know, we have come a long way in overcoming, you know, sort of that, that perception.
Yeah, well, it took us a long time. So going back, Marc was CISO at McDonald's. I was CISO at Starbucks. We're seen as direct competitors over the breakfast day part. And it took a while to get internal organizations, especially legal, comfortable with the fact that, you know, just because I'm sharing what we're doing from a security perspective with McDonald's doesn't mean that they're going to own the breakfast day part. In fact, we all get better if we start doing this, right? Because this isn't, it usually isn't a specific entity. It's all entities. There's an economic motivation for our adversaries, and they typically go where the money is. So they'll start with financial services, and when FI figures out how to address the problem, they're continuing to look to monetize that, and they're going to start moving through, and they're going to move to retail, and they're going to move to others. So the fact that a competitor gets hit with a problem and is struggling with something is not a direct benefit, and it's only going to it's only going to pivot to you at some point. So once we got organizations comfortable with the fact that we're actually all better off if we collaborate from a cybersecurity perspective, then that kind of opened up lines of communication. But I think it was part of the security discipline being viewed through a legacy corporate lens that said, if we do it, we can't share it outside because this is a competitive advantage. And once we broke through that, you see that the landscape today is much different. And quite frankly, I don't want anybody to have to go through the hard lessons that I had to go through. If I can prevent that, we're all better off.
I think that's really admirable to share that information. I know both of you, you know, help guide through the executive committee of the Cybersecurity Collaborative, sharing these tools and leadership practices and things so that other people can benefit from this. So not having to, go through that school of hard knocks first. I mean, everybody's going to have our own school of hard knocks, but if we can get 3 of those crossed off the list, so that we can spend more time on the other 2, that would be much better. Before we get into, I know we're getting close to the end of the period. I'd like to pop up some poll questions. So if we could cue the poll questions. First, did you find this session informative? If you could click that for us, that would be great. And while they're answering those questions, I have a few more questions for you guys. What advice would you have to listeners who have these professional dreams to be a CISO? And what's the most important thing that they should focus on to achieve them? Marc, I'll let you go first this time.
I would say somebody, speaking of mentors, a guy a long time ago that I almost went to work for in the security world said, we all learn on the fringes of what we already know. So I think that's important because we've talked about, if you hearken back to observation, curiosity, willingness to learn those things, that's all about, you have to be willing to be right on the edge of that and then press yourself. The second part of that, however, is that you have to find a place and people that will afford you sort of that latitude and that freedom while still giving you direction, support, and boundaries. And that's sort of, to me, that's the sweet spot of professional growth. And where do you get is that if you can get those those situations where you're comfortable doing that and you're being given the leadership that you need, I think it's limitless.
Excellent. Dave?
Yeah, so that was a great answer by Marc. I'm going to be a little bit more tactical in my response. So I'll provide some context. I'm assuming that this is essentially, hey, I want to become a CISO one day. What things should I be doing, or where should I be focusing? And I will tell you the 2 inhibitors for people to move into cybersecurity leadership. One is business acumen. So they're really good on the technical side. Learn your business, know your business, understand financials, be able to speak to that and correlate what your program is doing back to business initiatives and value. The other is strategic thought. So very in the moment, very tactical. That's what you're going to get as an individual contributor. The higher you go in the organization, the further down the road you need to be looking. And so find opportunities where you can kind of build that muscle, think out a little bit further, even if it's not directly in your role. Start asking the questions of, hey, should we be looking at this? Or start trying to extend that visible horizon to kind of build that, because those are the things that will get you recognized of, wait a minute, I think you're ready for this. That it's the old adage of what got you there won't keep you there. I think what ends up happening is people over-index on the technical acumen, and at some point there's an inflection point, and that's where they see that their career in cybersecurity has a tendency to stall.
Great advice. We have one more poll question. Would you be interested in learning more about joining the Cybersecurity Collaborative? And while they're answering that question, where do you see this CISO role going? I mean, if you had to look into your crystal ball 5 years, 10 years down the road, it's gone through many changes to get to this point, but what do you think it's going to look like?
I'm going to let Dave answer that.
Well, the obvious answer would be that security is a part of everything. So in the 80s, there was a concept of chief quality officer, and most companies in corporate America appointed a chief quality officer, and they had these teams that were supposed to be driving quality through various disciplines. And then they came to the realization that quality's a part of everything. So why did we create this stovepipe? And we just need to make sure that everybody's doing that. I think inherently that is not going to come to pass, just because it is a very different viewpoint, and one that takes practice and effort to kind of develop. So I think there are personal traits, just like Marc brought forward in personality profiles, that are make the position attractive, but then there's a constant kind of tuning and refining that thought process to be thinking out in front. To say that we just want everybody to think that way is probably a fallacy. So to take that forward, what I would say is I think you will see more of a consolidation of risk and physical security with cybersecurity into a single discipline. And I would say that it's going to be elevated within importance in the organization. So I would say that whatever that aggregate is probably going to report to the CEO, and you're going to end up seeing that it will be seen as a foundational cross-functional discipline within the enterprise, where today we have sharp elbows and we're trying to kind of fight into some conversations around supply chain and others because they're not thinking that way. I think that's what we will end up seeing in the coming decade.
Dave, I think that's a great place to leave it. I think I really appreciate you guys taking the time to share this information. I think our listeners have gotten a lot of value out of this. It's very beneficial. And the more that we share this leadership information, the better and stronger all of us will be protecting all of our companies against these big threats. So thank you, Dave. Thank you, Marc. It's really been a real pleasure. And thanks to everybody for tuning in. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Take care, guys.